Welcome to this ILMS Academy session on one of India's most talked about and most misunderstood labor law developments, the so-called 4-day work week. In 2021, when the central government released draft rules under the new labor codes, headlines across India exploded. India shifts to a 4-day work week. Social media lit up. Employees celebrated. Office water cooler conversations buzzed with excitement. But almost everything that went viral was wrong. The new labor codes do not reduce your working hours. They do not give you an extra paid day off. They do not bring India in line with the 32-hour workweek experiments being tried in the UK or Iceland. What they do, and what nobody seemed to read carefully, is allow a compressed workweek. Fewer days. Same total hours. Which means longer shifts on the days you do work. In this video, we will walk through 8 critical topics: why this became a viral story, what the law actually says, the maths of compressed versus reduced hours, the spread over and consent rules, why employers might welcome it, why workers should be cautious, how India's model compares globally, and what still needs to happen before any of this becomes reality on the ground. Let's separate fact from viral fiction. Let us start with the story everyone got wrong. In 2021, the central government released draft rules under the new labor codes, including the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code. News outlets immediately published headlines declaring that India was shifting to a 4-day work week. Social media amplified the message: work 4 days, get paid for 5. People compared India to Iceland's 32-hour week experiment. HR professionals started getting questions from excited employees. Almost all of it was wrong. Here is what the law actually says. India has not mandated a 4-day work week. The total 48-hour weekly cap remains fully intact. What the OSH Code does is allow, not require, a compressed schedule. And compressed means the same 48 hours squeezed into 4 days instead of 5 or 6. That means longer shifts, potentially 10 to 12 hours per day, not fewer total hours of work. And critically, worker consent is required. No employer can simply announce a 4-day schedule and impose it on their workforce. The bottom line verdict: the 4-day workweek is real as a legal option, but it means longer daily shifts, not a shorter work life. The confusion between a compressed workweek and a reduced hours workweek is the root cause of all the viral misinformation. Let us now go deeper into the legal framework. Let us now look at what the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, the OSH Code, actually says about working hours and weekly schedules. The first and most fundamental point is the 48-hour weekly limit. This is a hard, non-negotiable ceiling. No compressed schedule, no employer preference, no state rule can exceed this. It is the immovable foundation on which all flexibility provisions are built. Second, the code introduces what it calls flexible work arrangements. This is the provision that triggered all the viral excitement. Employers are now allowed to redistribute weekly hours across different numbers of days. This is a genuine and meaningful departure from the colonial-era Factories Act, which was far more rigid about daily hour limits. Third, and this is the crucial distinction that almost everyone missed, the code enables a compressed work week, not a reduced hours work week. The maths is simple: 4 days multiplied by 12 hours equals 48 hours. 5 days multiplied by 9.6 hours equals 48 hours. 6 days multiplied by 8 hours equals 48 hours. The weekly total stays the same regardless of the number of working days. Fourth, and this is why the 4-day week hasn't actually happened anywhere yet, the codes devolve detailed rule-making to state governments. States must specify spread over ceilings, overtime caps, consent procedures, and sectoral exceptions before any employer can legally adopt a compressed schedule. As of today, most states have not issued these rules. So the option exists in law, but its activation requires state action that is still pending. Let us look at the numbers clearly, because the maths is where the confusion begins and ends. 3 models, all totaling 48 hours per week. The traditional schedule, 6 days of 8 hours each. This is what most Indian workers in factories and offices have always known. 1 day off. The current common practice, 5 days of 9.6 hours each. 2 days off, the model most urban office workers follow today. The compressed 4-day week under the new codes, 4 days of 12 hours each. 3 days off. On the surface, going from 2 days off to 3 sounds like a genuine win. And it is, if you can handle 12-hour shifts. But here is the critical distinction that separates India's model from the global experiments that inspired all the viral excitement. When the UK, Iceland, and Japan trialed 4-day work weeks, they reduced total hours, typically from 40 to 32 hours per week, with no reduction in pay. Workers got shorter weeks and fewer total hours of work. That is a genuine improvement in work-life balance. India's codes do none of that. The 48-hour weekly ceiling stays fixed. The only change is redistribution, the same total hours compressed into fewer days. 3 days off sounds attractive until you consider that you are spending 12 hours at work on each of the 4 days you do go in. This is not a criticism, it is simply the factual distinction. And it is one that almost nobody explained clearly when the viral headlines spread. Even if a compressed 4-day week is legally possible in principle, several important rules constrain what it looks like in practice. First, the spread over limit. Under the draft OSH rules, the spread over, which is the total time span from when a shift starts to when it ends, including all breaks, cannot exceed 12 hours per day in most cases. Going beyond 12 hours requires specific government approval. This means you cannot have a 14-hour shift even if the actual work time is only 11 hours. Second, mandatory rest intervals. Workers must receive at least 30 minutes of rest after every 5 hours of continuous work. These breaks do not count as working hours, but they do count toward the 12-hour spread over. The practical effect is a ceiling of roughly 10 to 11 hours of actual work per day, even on a compressed schedule. Third, and this is the most important point from a worker rights perspective, consent is mandatory. Employers cannot simply announce a 4-day schedule and implement it. Worker consent is required. Draft rules specify consultation with works committees or employee representatives. Any major change to working conditions that is imposed without consent may constitute a change in service conditions under the Industrial Relations Code, which has its own procedural requirements. And fourth, overtime rules still apply. Any hours worked beyond the normal daily limit must be paid at double the wage rate. Workers cannot be penalized for refusing overtime. And a 12-hour day that is called standard without overtime pay is simply illegal. These 4 rules together make the practical implementation of a compressed work week significantly more complex than the viral headline suggested. Now let us look at why some employers are genuinely enthusiastic about the compressed 4-day work week, because the business case is real. The first reason is productivity. Longer, uninterrupted work blocks are particularly valuable in industries where deep focus work matters: software development, consulting, financial analysis, creative work. The constant fragmentation of 8-hour days, with their meetings, transitions, and interruptions, can actually reduce effective output. International studies on compressed work weeks consistently show higher output per hour when workers have longer stretches of focus time. The second reason is global alignment. For Indian companies tied to global supply chains, whether in manufacturing, logistics, or IT services, a compressed 4-day schedule can help align staffing intensity with overseas client timelines and demand cycles. An export-oriented factory can push hard for 4 days and then rest, matching the rhythm of international markets rather than the domestic calendar. The third reason is operational cost savings. Fewer working days mean measurably lower costs: electricity, canteen services, transport arrangements, welfare facilities. For industries with large factory floors or campus-style operations, these savings can be significant. There are also indirect benefits. Workers who get 3 consecutive rest days tend to take fewer midweek leave days, reducing absenteeism. For employers, then, the compressed week can genuinely improve efficiency, reduce costs, and enhance competitive positioning, provided it is implemented thoughtfully and with worker consent. For workers, particularly in manual, factory, and lower wage roles, the compressed 4-day week raises serious and legitimate concerns. The first is fatigue and health risk. 12-hour working days, even when technically compliant with spread over limits, are physically and mentally taxing. They increase the risk of workplace accidents, reduce alertness toward the end of the shift, and contribute to long-term health problems including chronic fatigue, musculoskeletal stress, and sleep disruption. The second concern is what I would call the work-life balance paradox. 3 days off does sound attractive. But when you factor in the reality of 12-hour working days, commuting time, exhaustion on arrival home, and the physical demands of manual work, workers effectively have no meaningful personal time on working days at all. The 3 days off may not compensate for the intensity of the 4 days on. Third, there is a genuine fear of hidden exploitation. Workers worry that employers will use the compressed schedule to normalize 12-hour days, merge what used to be overtime into the standard shift, and reduce the total overtime opportunities that many low-income workers rely on to supplement their base earnings. Fourth, and this is critical for factory and informal sector workers, overtime income is not optional for many families. It is a necessary supplement. A schedule that eliminates overtime opportunities by restructuring hours could directly reduce monthly take-home pay. Fifth, forced consent is a real concern in workplaces without strong unions. And sixth, the disruption to childcare and transport arrangements disproportionately affects women and caregivers who depend on predictable hours. These concerns are not hypothetical. They are grounded in the lived realities of India's workforce. Let us now place India's model in a global context, because this comparison is essential to understanding what the 4-day workweek debate actually means. In the United Kingdom, large-scale pilots between 2021 and 2023 tested a genuine 4-day workweek with reduced total hours, typically 32 hours instead of 40, on full pay. Workers worked less. Their salaries stayed the same. These were carefully monitored, voluntary experiments with measured outcomes for productivity and well-being. Iceland ran similar experiments, as did companies across Spain, Belgium, and Scandinavia. Japan saw high-profile corporate trials, notably Microsoft Japan in 2019, which showed productivity gains from a Friday closure policy. In each of these cases, the defining feature was fewer total hours of work, not just fewer days. India's labor codes do none of this. Looking at the comparison table on screen, the differences are stark. Global experiments reduce weekly hours, India keeps 48. Global models maintain pay for fewer hours, India keeps the same pay for the same 48 hours. Global pilots were voluntary, experimental, and closely monitored. India's framework is legislative, applying to all employers once states notify the rules. And the primary goal globally was worker well-being. India's primary goal is operational flexibility for employers. This is not a value judgment. Both approaches have merit in their contexts. But it is important to be clear, India is not joining the global reduced hours movement. India is enabling a compressed work week, which is a fundamentally different concept with fundamentally different implications for workers. Despite the excitement, the 4-day compressed work week has not been widely implemented anywhere in India. Let us understand why. 4 barriers stand out. First, most states have not yet finalized the OSH rules that would activate the compressed week option. Without clear guidance on spread over ceilings, consent requirements, and sector-specific exceptions, employers who try to implement a 4-day schedule risk legal exposure. Second, many industries are simply not suited to compression. Continuous process factories, retail stores that depend on daily footfall, customer service operations, and construction sites cannot easily restructure their operational rhythms into 4 intense days. Third, trade unions are actively resistant. Their concerns are legitimate. Longer daily shifts increase fatigue and safety risks, and a compressed schedule that eliminates overtime opportunities can reduce income for the very workers who need it most. And fourth, India's labor enforcement infrastructure is still catching up. Monitoring spread over compliance, verifying consent records, and ensuring overtime is paid correctly across millions of informal and semi-formal workplaces is a major challenge for understaffed state inspectorates. So what does India need before this can work fairly? 5 things: clear state-level rules, strong enforcement mechanisms to prevent misuse, detailed, worker-accessible guidelines on rights under compressed schedules, genuine consultation with unions and industry bodies, not just box-ticking consent, and broad awareness campaigns so workers know what the law permits and what protections they have. Without these safeguards, the flexibility that the courts create risks becoming a loophole for exploitation rather than a genuine improvement in working life. And that brings us to the end of today's session on India's 4-day workweek, reality or myth. Let me leave you with 3 key distinctions that cut through all the noise. Compressed does not equal reduced. India's new codes allow you to work the same 48 hours in 4 days rather than 5 or 6. That is not fewer hours of work, it is longer days. Option does not equal mandate. No employer is required to implement a 4-day week. And no employer can force one on workers without consent. It is a legal possibility, not a policy reality, and in most states, it cannot even be implemented yet because the activating rules have not been issued. And flexibility does not equal freedom. The codes create flexibility for employers to redesign schedules. Whether workers benefit from that flexibility depends entirely on how it is implemented, what safeguards are in place, and how effectively those safeguards are enforced. The 4-day work week in India is real, but it is not what the viral headlines described. It is a compressed schedule provision that offers genuine value for certain industries and certain workers, and genuine risks for others. Understanding what the law actually says, rather than what social media claims it says, is the foundation of making informed decisions about your work life, your employment rights, and your career. That is exactly what ILMS Academy's certificate course in labor laws is designed to equip you with. The link is on your screen. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time.